And she has her service dog, Irish, with us, helping her out. And then I want to take a moment and just say a special thank you to Jessica Billingsley and Madison McMahon for helping us set this event up, get everything in place. And our special thank you to our IT friends who just helped us solve all of our issues before we got started. So guys, if you could turn the camera on when you get a chance, that would be great. And then we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to Shannon. Shannon, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Around Irish is hopefully not going to leave me. Well, thank you for having me. I'm, oh, of course, my file goes away.
Did I turn our sound on? Oh, our sound is on.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Well, thank you for having me. I really am excited to be here. It's always good to, it's always a favorite topic to talk about dogs, guide dogs. They're awesome. All dogs are awesome. And thank you to Madison and Jessica for all their help. So I guess let's go with my first slide is guide dogs. What are they? And barriers experienced by guide dog users. So there's a lot more about guide dogs than just what they are, but I didn't want to really summarize it. So if we can go to the next slide. I put my agenda about who am I and what a guide dog is and stages of the guide dog's life and stuff about training and what we do in guide dog school when we go to school. I'm doing this more from a user's perspective than from the trainer's perspective because I know a lot more about being a user than I do about being a trainer. I've talked about barriers to guide dogs, some legal protections, what businesses can ask, and what the responsibilities of a guide dogs are if we even get there. Just, I don't know. And then questions. I'm trying to leave time for questions. Okay, next slide, please. So this should be, my name is Shannon Dillon. I'm president of California Association of Guide Dog Users. Which is a division of the National Federation of the Blind of California. And my dog is Seeing Eye Dog Irish. She is a guide dog. That's the type of service dog she is. And she's from the Seeing Eye, so she's a Seeing Eye dog. Next slide, please. So what's a guide dog? So a guide dog is a type of service dog under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And service animals are defined as dogs that are individually trained to do work or perform tasks for people with disabilities. And then I provided some examples of what different kinds of service dogs are. And let's see. So they do all these different kinds of tasks. These are all service animals. Next slide, please. So service animals aren't pets, and the work or task the dog has been trained to provide must be directly related to a person's disability. And dogs whose sole function is to provide comfort or emotional support do not qualify as service animals under the ADA. They do for housing purposes, emotional support animals are, have protections in the housing context, but in other contexts, it's generally just the service animals that are protected, like as far as going into businesses and public places. Okay, so, and guide dogs are obviously, they're trained to guide people who are blind. Next slide, please. So how and where are guide dogs trained? So there are approximately 15 guide dog schools in the guide dog programs in the United States. I tried to find a good list of them. I used to know where one was and I couldn't find them, but there's like 14 or 15 guide dog programs. There's 3 in California. There's like 3 in New York. There's 1 in Florida that I am aware of. There's like 1 in Connecticut. I think there's 14 or 15 across the U.S. I didn't list them all, but you can pretty much Google guide dog programs and come up with a list of guide dog schools. And the Seeing Eye is one of them, and that's where my dog is from. There are also international schools in different countries. So Canada has a bunch of countries have guide dog programs of their own. They all have a little bit different rules about what you have to do to get the dog and the program you go through to get the dog. And then the International Guide Dog Federation provides training standards for guide dogs worldwide. I think it's actually I don't think schools have to belong, programs don't have to belong to it, but they basically provide, as I understand it, standards for what a guide dog should do and what they should be able to do to help the blind person. And so next slide, please. So stages of a guide dog life. I got these stages from the Seeing Eye, so you can look that up. I provided the link. So stage 1 is the first weeks, and the little puppies are named starting on October 1st. They start with the letter A, and they go through the letters of the alphabet, sometimes twice in 1 year. So there'll be an A litter, then a B litter, then a C litter, then a D litter, meaning like also Irish starts with I, so she came from an I litter. Sometimes they get through the alphabet twice before the next October, and then they start over with A again. And the names can't sound like a command, and they can't have a negative connotation. At 4 weeks, the puppies go to playrooms where they experience stairs, replicas of curbs and train stations and AstroTurf. I think they want to get them used to different textures and different things that they're going to experience in their lives as guide dogs. Then stage 2, puppy raising. That's where at 8 weeks, the puppy goes to a puppy raiser to learn socialization and basic obedience. And at stage 3, at about 1 year, the dogs go back to the campus and they're trained with a sighted instructor to be a guide dog. And after about 4 months of training, the dog is matched with a blind person, and the person and trained together under the supervision of the sighted instructor to learn to work with each other and become a dog team. And at stage 4 is their career. That's when they're working with the blind person, the blind or visually impaired person. And then stage 5, of course, is retirement. And that's, they either stay with the person they've been working with, or sometimes they go back to the school and they're adopted out to someone. Depends on the ability. I'm sure it depends on a whole bunch of things. Some people keep their dogs, some people don't. Next slide, please. So what is training like for a guide dog user? So first you have to apply for the guide dog on an online application. You fill out a bunch of your pertinent medical information, including like any limitations. I've known people that have guide dogs that have like limited use of an arm or have some hearing loss. But they still need a guide dog. So, and they also want to know you can walk a certain amount to go to school, because part of training with the guide dog is walking all over the place. They give you all these different routes, and they want you to work and experience the dog working in all sorts of situations, so you're prepared for it when you and the dog leave the school and go out to, continue your life after you've gotten your dog. So the school comes out to see you. They want to see how fast you walk. They want to get to know your personality. They try to match you with a dog that best goes with you. A lot goes into matching the dogs with the person they're going to work with. So once a person is accepted into the program, they go train with the guide dog. It may occur in a residential program. I think most of them are residential, where you go stay in a dormitory. Some of them are in-home training, or some schools will provide in-home training on a limited basis, just based on, some programs are set up that way. But for the most part, they like you to come to the school and stay there. Next slide, please. So training lasts from 14 to 28 days. Some schools only keep you for 14 days. Some will have you attend the first time for, I think, 24 days, but then the next time you go, you only have to stay 18 days for training, unless you need to stay longer for some reason. So all programs are a little bit different. They also use different kind of training methods. Some schools really heavily use food rewards. Some focus more on verbal praise and correction. Some use, obviously, clicker training along with the food rewards. I learned a combination of both at the Seeing Eye. The clicker training was an optional class, and I chose to take it. And it's actually a really cool thing. You can use it to, if you're out in the world later on and you need to find trash every day on your way to work to throw, that your dog relieves and you need to throw it away. You can teach your dog to find the trash can, or like to find the ramp to light rail. Yeah, since I trained with her in New Jersey, she won't know what a ramp to light rail is until, I come back to Sacramento and show her the ramp and give it a name, and then tell her to find it again and click when she finds it. So it's a process. It's a process how to train her with a clicker, but it's worth it. If the person completes a training program, then they graduate and can continue to work the guide dog. And the person can, the team, the person, or the team of person and dog, you may get follow-up services during the guide dog's working life. And then, so sometimes it's hard to figure something out, or your dog is, going too fast, going too slow. Maybe there's a really confusing area you have to walk through and you're not sure how to teach your dog how to work you through it. So you can get follow-up services for different reasons. And then retirement, of course, is when the person in the school decide that the guide dog, it's time for them to retire. Next slide, please. What do you do at the guide dog school? So I think I put the typical schedule here. You basically, it's a really long day. You start at 5:30 in the morning, you park and feed. Park is the term that we use at Seeing Eye for taking the dog to the bathroom to relieve it. So at 5:30 a.m. you relieve the dog and feed it, and then at 7 you have breakfast. And then you're free until 8 a.m., which is when you go on your morning trip, or you go downtown to Morristown, New Jersey, and you are in a situation where they have different routes they want you to walk with your dog, and they present, at first they just get you used to walking a certain route, and then they introduce obstacles to make sure your dog properly gets you around obstacles, or they make sure you're crossing streets correctly, or they do traffic checks. And a traffic check is when they've taught the dogs to not obviously walk out in front of a moving car, and so they will try to pull out of driveways, or pull out in situations where they probably shouldn't, they're simulating real life, right? Like sometimes people accidentally pull out of a driveway and don't see you, and it's your dog. If your dog can do it, your dog should, even though you've told it to go forward, your dog should say, no, I'm not gonna go forward. It's not safe for us to keep moving. We'll talk about that a little more later. But anyway, so then 11:30, you take the dog, you park it again, and your lunch is at 12. At 1, you have another trip where you go do routes, or maybe you have lectures. At 4:30 is park and feed. At 5 is dinner. Then after dinner, you have a lecture, or maybe you're free till 8 p.m., and at 8 p.m. you park the dog again, take it to the bathroom, and then you're usually free till the next morning. So it's a long day. It's a long day, you do a lot of work. It's really tiring, but you learn a lot about your dog. You also have to, to get your dog, it's really important to groom them. So they want you to take your dog, and they have a room where you go downstairs and groom it. And of course the dog is way more interested because they're all young. We get the dogs when they're like 16 to 18 months, and they'd rather play than be groomed. But, well, at least that's my experience, that they'd rather, especially if there's other dogs in the grooming room, they're like, let's play with that other dog who wants to lay here and be brushed. The home training is another option. Some schools do home training, and when you do home training, it's a one-on-one situation, one student, one instructor, and so your schedule is a little more flexible at the school. I think there's different amounts of students per different schools, but I think they usually have 1 to 2 students per instructor. But there may be a whole class of like 24 students at a time. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I'm taking too long. I'm just going to run through some of the commands that the dogs know. Basically they know left, right, forward, and rest. And basically those are the most basic commands. For rest means stay at the seeing eye. I don't think all the schools use that. Some just use stay. But left, right, and forward is basically how you navigate the world. And you and your dog walk through the world going left, right, and forward. And you build on those commands. The dog stops at curbs so that, and you're like, why are you stopping? And you usually can hear a street in front of you or see the street in front of you. And you reach out with your toe and feel the curb. And then you're like, okay, good job, Irish. And then you tell her to go forward. And you know that there's a step down or up or whatever. And the dog is taught to follow a line of travel, stop at steps or obstacles, identify steps, escalators, and elevators upon verbal command. So you can walk into a room and tell them, hey, find the elevator, but you also try to give them clues, like especially if you know the building. You can be like, left to the elevator, and you try and point at it, especially if you know where you are. If you don't know where you are and can't see, you either use your vision or use your ears or a little bit of both to listen for a bell for the elevator or whatever. It's your dog to really direct the dog. Sometimes they will just find the elevator if you tell them to find the elevator, but it kind of helps. Familiarity with the environment really helps. It's your job to give the dog directions and help it get where you want to go. Intelligent disobedience is what I talked about before, where if you tell them to go forward because you want to cross a street and they can tell there's a car that, is about to hit you, like it's a silent car and you don't hear it coming, or then they are supposed to disobey your command to go forward. And that is intelligent disobedience. And it's what makes guide dogs very special, because they learn to disobey commands if they think that's what they're supposed to do. Next slide, please. So they learn to identify empty seats in buses or light rail. It doesn't always work so well, but they can learn that. They also can help you find like a seat if you're in a restaurant, or if you're in a restaurant and you leave your table to go to the bathroom. They can usually, my experience is they'll take you right back to your table after you find the restroom and use it. They lie on the floor in a train, or they go under the seat in a plane. They lie on the floor in the plane or the car or the train. They find the counter in coffee shops or whatever. You can, if you're in a store or coffee shop, you can tell them to find the counter. And again, you listen for the cash register. You kind of try and judge by where you can tell people are standing. But they really can just find a counter. Usually it's just, there could be multiple counters, right? It's not always necessarily the cash register, right? There are other counters. So, but it helps. They also learn to work through revolving doors and not get their little paws caught. Next slide, please. They can learn to find trash cans. I talked about that earlier. They also learn appropriate behavior, like don't bark in public and focus on their work. They learn to sleep under the desk or a bed in the office, or sleep under a table or chair during meetings. They don't read traffic lights. It's up to the blind person. Their mobility and orientation training, they need to know how to, I think I forgot to say this earlier, before you ever go to school, a guide dog school, you're really supposed to have a certain level of orientation, mobility, whether it's using a cane or however you travel independently. You need to be able to travel independently without a dog before you get a dog to help you travel. So it's really just another tool, but it's not really supposed to be you're already supposed to have some level of ability to travel. And then the dog obviously just adds to that. Okay, so they watch for moving cars in streets and driveways. They work through crowds. We were trained in New York because I was in New Jersey, so we were to train in Times Square amongst other places. That was pretty amazing. Lots of people, lots of huge, wide streets. So it was very different than Sacramento or San Francisco. They maintain a line of travel on roads where there are no sidewalks. That's called country travel. And it's a little bit different than following a sidewalk, right? Because you're walking on the edge of a road and still trying to keep a line of travel. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is what does a guide dog do in the workplace? When their harness is on, it's like wearing a suit. They're dressed for work. They should behave like a dog and sleep under the desk, like a guide dog and sleep under the desk or on their bed or under a chair and table. They shouldn't bark inappropriately. In my previous job, I flew a lot, and so working was also part of taking planes, trains, and automobiles, right? It was like part of my dog's life. This dog has a much easier life and pretty much just went to the office every day. Next slide, please. So what does a guide dog do at home? Once the harness comes off, they're pretty much just a dog. They're trained not to jump on the furniture. They learn not to counter surf. They learn not to jump on people when people come to the door. But all of this is stuff they were trained by their puppy raiser to do, but the guide dog user has to maintain that training. Obviously dogs, like kids or whatever, they get away with whatever they can get away with, right? So it's up to you to maintain that training. Next slide, please. So the barriers. So believe it or not, people petting or making eye contact with your guide dog can be distracting to the dog. Even making eye contact with the dog can distract it from work. Cooing or clucking at them. Irish, so I'm not, this isn't something I'm really strict about, but I know it's really something that we are taught to say a lot of, because if your dog gets distracted by somebody and they're interested in getting petted or going and visiting that person, and then they let you step off a curb or they bump you into something, so that becomes an issue, right? And then so I think that just becomes, so that's the whole reason behind it, is just to keep the safety of the user and the dog team. So inaccessible forms. The Department of Transportation in December 2020, to address all the issues with a lot of dogs on airlines, the Department of Transportation started requiring everybody service dog users to fill out these forms for people to fly with their dogs, their service dogs. And the problem is the forms are not accessible. So if you're blind or visually impaired, you have to find someone to help you fill it out and sign it. You also have to do it a couple days before the flight, but not too far in advance of the flight, because most of them require you to, it has to be within a certain period of time before your flight. They don't want you to use a form that's like a month old. But another problem is that airlines tend to enforce the regulations differently. I just saw a Facebook post the other day from someone who was trying to use the same form she had used 2 days ago to fly out, and to fly back, she was using the same form, and they insisted that form was out of date and she needed to fill it out. I haven't experienced that, but I've heard all sorts of stories that are just very, very frustrating. The Department of Transportation also requires service dogs to be under 65 pounds. You guys can't see Irish online because she's down at my feet, but Irish is not 65 pounds currently. And a lot of guide dogs aren't 65 pounds. So the airlines can ask you to take a different flight if your dog is over 65 pounds. And of course, you won't know that till you show up for your flight. And they're like, hey, we don't feel like we have room for you on the flight. We need you to take a later flight. That hasn't happened to me yet. So I'm going to hope that, I'm lucky that way. But it is written in the regulations. Some airlines are also using a third party to validate whether a guide dog is a legitimate service animal. And I've definitely seen people posting online that they were denied, that even though they have a guide dog and they're blind or visually impaired, they have been denied. They've been told they don't have a legitimate service dog and they weren't allowed to fly with it. And that doesn't happen. That doesn't always happen before you get to the airport. So again, it's just very different. So there's an article from the Washington Post I put on here that talks about some of these issues. Next slide, please. Also, another problem is sometimes law enforcement don't know are unwilling to force laws. There are a lot of laws that I'll talk about, I'll briefly go over later. And unfortunately, they don't always know the laws or they aren't willing to enforce them. And so even if there is an issue, there's often, you can't really get help to deal with it. There are confusion in businesses and it says businesses and housing about the difference between guide dogs and service dogs and emotional support dogs. I've just got a call last week about a woman being denied access to a little restaurant in Lafayette, and they said, we don't allow dogs, and she said it's a service dog, and she had the harness, and she had the ID from the school, which actually you're not required to show, and they just kept saying, no dogs, we don't care, no dogs. And so she did try to get law enforcement involved, and the law enforcement said, well, sorry, they don't have to serve anyone they don't want to serve. So, I have been denied by restaurants. That hasn't happened in a long time to me personally, but I get calls from people all the time, or regularly. Also, housing, again, emotional support animals are allowed in housing. Both emotional support animals and service dogs are allowed in housing, as opposed to businesses where it's just the service dogs. Attacks on guide dogs or interference with guide dogs is another issue. Interfering with the work of a guide dog in public, like I put an article in here about that. Again, it's interference by aggressive dogs or off-leash dogs, or often that's where the interference comes from, or dogs that get out of their yards, or dogs that aren't on leash. Those are issues that a lot of people have faced. My previous guide dog was attacked twice by an off-leash dog, and it's just another issue, and that's all in the article that I provided. And then keeping dogs from eating food off the ground, that's really bad in an airport. I guess that's kind of not as big of a barrier, but it's something you have to be aware of. Dogs, you definitely don't want them to eat something off the airport floor, because then you have to fly and you're worried about their tummy getting upset when you're flying. So I guess it's not really a barrier, but it's a concern. Rideshare denials. A lot of Uber and Lyft drivers. Some are really awesome. I've been really lucky. Just had a great Uber ride here today. But unfortunately, there was a lot of misunderstanding and difficulty with a lot of people getting, we get a lot of denials based on our guide dogs. They just don't want to take the dogs, and they keep saying, well, you have to take the pet Uber. Take the Uber for pet. And or they just say, I don't want to take dogs. I don't care. Let me see, checking. Okay, I need to wrap it up soon. So sales of service dog equipment online makes it easy for anyone to go get service dog equipment and say, this is a service dog. That probably helps with confusion. Business owners will be like, hey, We had a service dog in here last week, and they were really inappropriately behaved, so we really don't like dogs in here. I've had restaurant owners say that. So I'm assuming that, I guess we all assume that the sales of service dog equipment to anybody doesn't help with that. It also confuses the issue, like my dog wears a harness, not a vest. She is a service dog, but I've had people say, well, how do I know that's a real guide dog? If it was a service dog, it should be wearing a vest. And for my dog, that's not true, because she's a guide dog, not another kind of service dog. So she wears a harness because she has to guide me with it. So just confusion, because anyone can go online and get a service dog equipment. And then on Facebook, you can easily find an entity that will certify your dog in 3 easy steps. You can go look that up on Facebook and easily certify your dog as a service dog in 3 easy steps. Next slide, please. I just listed a bunch of stuff here. The Americans with Disabilities Act, and talks about state and local government and businesses and nonprofits that serve the public have to allow service animals. Then I list several penal code sections. They have to do with interference with guide dogs. It's illegal to interfere with the use of a guide dog, or to, you can intentionally interfere with the use of a guide dog, or prevent or interfere the user of a guide dog from accessing a public place, like the restaurant, refusing to let someone in. Knowing and fraudulent misrepresentation as an owner or trainer of a guide dog. So if someone knows that they don't really have a service dog and they misrepresent it as a service dog, that's actually a violation of a penal code provision. And then I also listed the civil code provisions that just say guide dogs have the right to access public places and go where their blind or visually impaired handler goes. And that's 54.2. Next slide, please. And then what are the 2 questions businesses can ask? When it's not obvious what service a service dog provides, a business owner or staff can a business or staff can ask, is the dog a service animal or required because of a disability? And what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? Next slide, please. And what are the responsibilities of guide dog owner? And they are to keep the dog healthy, take it to the vet, get it its vaccinations, use the preventatives from flea and worms and stuff. Relieve the dog on a regular basis, right? It helps prevent accidents and it helps prevent accidents if you keep your dog on a schedule. Keep the dog from eating food it shouldn't eat. Feed the dog on a schedule. Groom it to reduce shedding. Correct the dog when it misbehaves. Correct it immediately. Obviously, timing is really important because you want the dog to know what you're correcting it for, so you have to do it pretty quickly. Praise it for good work and practice obedience. We're given little obedience routines at work at the school that we're supposed to practice just to maintain them. And of course, when you work every day, you do obedience just by telling it forward and left and right and find the ramp or find the seat or whatever. That's also kind of practicing obedience, right? And then, of course, the last one was teaching family and people how to behave around the guide dog, like don't feed it from the table. And yeah, that's it. So next slide, please. And I think that should just bring us up to questions. So I hope I didn't go through that too fast. But.
Does anybody in the audience have any questions? Yeah.
Is there any specific breed of the guide dog?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. So any specific breed, guide dogs, a lot of schools use Labs and Goldens and I think there's at least one school that uses dogs that it gets from shelters and trains. So I don't think they have a specific breed, but a lot of schools, or certainly I know the CNI has a breeding program that breeds its own dogs. But yeah, I think Labs, Goldens, and then Shepherds are the most common, and but some schools use other things. But I think the most common are Labs and Goldens, and then Shepherds.
Labs and gold can be very hyper.
Yeah, the schools choose them for their temperament. So I think they try to match the temperament with the person and the activity of their lifestyle. And then obviously if the dog is not, in that 4-month period of training, or even during puppy raising, if they find something out that won't work for a guide dog, then the dog gets canceled out of the program, and it becomes a career change dog, and it becomes a really nice pet. So, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If there's one thing that you would want people to know about being around somebody with a service dog, what would that be? That would be helpful to service dog users.
Wow, that's awesome. I think the biggest thing is probably just asking before. The one I hear the most from people is that they really wish people would ask before they pet. I don't think I get as much of it because I have a shepherd, but I think my friends with labs, and particularly golden retrievers, I think, people, I think they get petted a lot. And it's distracting to people. So I would say that's what most people would say. And for me, I think my biggest thing would be also, it's really helpful if dogs are on leash, or if they're, I don't know, because I don't want to, but if dogs are on leash, or at least that dogs are friendly. I actually had a really friendly dog run up, and I was walking with my dog in the rain and to work, and didn't even realize a dog was coming up to us, and I slipped and fell because my dog wanted to play with the other dog. She was really young, and so she reacted to the other dog by, I don't know, she cut in front of me to go meet the other dog that was coming to visit her. And so I slipped and fell, and it was a rainy day, so I was all covered up. I don't even think I got a bruise on me, but I had like a computer in my bag and a braille display. And so I broke the braille display, and it was like a $2,000 braille display. And so like the littlest thing can be a big deal. So my biggest thing is honestly off-leash dogs, or dogs that, I don't know, it's scary, like when off-leash dogs run up to you. So sorry, I kind of took too long answering that.
So a friend of mine had to leave, but he asked me to ask this question. Are they trained to identify electric cars?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that they specifically identify them because they're electric, but they are trained to not let us walk out in front of cars. And a lot of that, does have to do with electric cars and not being able to hear them. So, yeah, we can't hear them. And so unless you have a little vision to work with, or even if you do have a little vision to work with, you still might not see the electric car coming.
I never even thought about that.
Yeah.
Because they're so quiet.
They're so quiet, yeah. That's a great question.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So I think it depends on the, I think you're having another person come speak next week. I think PTSD, definitely they can have service dogs, and it just depends on what the dog actually does for you, or does for the person with PTSD. If it actually performs a task that's related to the PTSD, then it's a service dog. If it just makes the person feel better to have it with them, then that's not actually performing a task. But I think when you hear from, I think you're gonna hear from Canine Companions for Independence, and I think they train all sorts of service dogs. So they should be really good about answering, not trying to blow off the question. That's my best answer.
Yeah, we have Canine Companions coming next Wednesday to do a presentation, and like Shannon said, they do a lot of different service animals. They'll be a good
Yeah.
group to answer that question as well. So come next week. We'd love to have you here.
Yeah.
Is there any questions, any other questions from folks in the audience, or is there anybody online that has questions? We are monitoring the chat, or you can come off mute as well. I think our speaker system's working for that, if you have questions online.
Cool.
I'm not seeing any questions from the chat.
I'll get out of your way.
You are perfectly fine.
Well, thank you. Sorry, I blocked you in.
You're okay, you're okay.
Okay, thanks.
All right, well, thank you everybody for being here, both in person in the audience and online. Next week, like I mentioned, we have Canine Companions who's going to be here talking about the services that they offer, the programs that they do, and they're gonna have a handful of service animals with them as well for everybody to meet. So thanks again for everybody being here. Keep an eye out for other updates from the Disability Advisory Committee this month. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So we'll go ahead and end the meeting. Cool.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I'm so sorry. I'll go this way. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I
Yeah.
really appreciate it.
I learned so much in just that little PowerPoint. So that was
Okay,
fantastic.
thanks. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
I'm obsessed with her cute little mouth.
Oh.
Just watching her sleep with her little
Mhm.
wrinkly jowls.
I know.
So
It's so
cute.
ridiculous.
Did you guys want to come up?
Just wanna see the dog.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, I don't care. I honestly don't really care about people petting her, so you're totally welcome to.
What's her name?
Yeah, Irish?
Irish.
Yeah, it's like I have to tell everyone that, but I don't care.
So she's not working now?
She's really not. I mean, she's just sit Irish. She's just standing here, so I don't really,
What a sweet.
yeah.
I have 2 shepherds.
Oh, that's awesome. They're
Long-hair
totally-
shepherds.
Oh, they're so beautiful.
So I didn't know, but you said as a guide dogs, they don't have harness. Feels the
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't have.
Yeah,